29-2A is done. And I'll recognize the honourable member for Calgary Mountain View.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. Very pleased to speak to motion 13. All Albertans know we're facing difficult times. Unemployment rates approaching all-time highs, revenues approaching all-time lows. Many of the factors causing these extremes are beyond our immediate control. Price of oil, lack of national infrastructure such as pipelines, and short-sighted policies of the recent Alberta governments. The future, though, is firmly in the hands of the NDP government now, at least for the next 3 years, and the choices it's making. Tying our economic well-being to one industry over many decades without convincing environmental standards, averaging $10 billion less in revenue every year, less than the lowest taxing province in the country for the past decade, neglecting the social supports of our most vulnerable people, including First Nations, we have all enjoyed this, quotes, Alberta advantage, which unfortunately was a delusion. Well described in children's stories as the golden goose or the king with no clothes. We've been living beyond the means of our province and of our planet. The proof is in the pudding. We now have a naive government, young and idealistic, who are, for the first time in my memory, making necessary and meaningful change. The past government couldn't make the changes. The past government was unable to make the changes necessary when oil was at $100 a barrel. And they couldn't do it during the recessions of the 80s and 90s, when they followed an austerity plan that we are still recovering from today. So let's work together to make this difficult time as short as possible and stop the partisan blame game which does not serve the public interest. We cannot continue to increase services and protect the environment and build an economy and not pay more than we've been paying for the last 30 years. To be fair, I do not envy the ministers and the Premier in these difficult times, steering Alberta through an unprecedented time in my memory. Nonetheless, leadership and vision is the definitive role of government, and Albertans deserve the best efforts of this no longer new NDP administration. The release of the 2016 budget leaves me with some serious questions about the vision the NDP have for our province. This is not to say that I disagree with every element of the budget. There's funding, albeit qualified, for affordable housing, an item sorely neglected by the previous BC administration of at least 4 years. There is a cut to small business taxes and investment tax credit, policies we have very strong support for. There's also commitment to the environment, a new provincial park in southwestern Alberta that will help promote tourism and this place as the destination for recreation and film industry and tourism, obviously. And it will, all of this, along with a carbon tax, will help us get off our carbon addiction. There are alternatives. The rest of the world is moving on, and we have to move on too. These are all issues the Liberals believe in and have pushed government to introduce. So I am thankful that this government is making some of these difficult decisions. My concern lies not with some of the specifics, but with the long-term vision again, and the necessary leadership, which seems to be lacking in this document. I would start with the most dramatic number, $10.4 billion deficit just this year. The number itself should give us serious pause. We must have an adult conversation about how we can and will share fairly in the suffering and the opportunities created in this time. With the right combination of borrowing, finding savings in our public services included, and paying for our important goods and services that keep people off the streets, out of depression, out of jail, and out of hospitals. Understandably, given the remarkable drop in provincial revenues and the decision not to cut drastically government services. But this doesn't mean we shouldn't look to reduce public service costs. That is a real sore bone of contention in the public today, that we are protecting one sector and not another. I'm not saying we have to be draconian, but we do have to look fairly at incomes and stability across the communities. What is unacceptable is the lack of any reasonable plan to repay debt or return to a balanced spending. The year 2024 has been put forward, but without evidence. It's an arbitrary shot in the dark. The government are taking a wait-and-pray position, primarily for oil prices, as past governments have done on Alberta's future. Should the price of oil remain low, we face a staggering potential for over $50 billion in debt at the end of their term. This budget offers no contingency for prolonged low oil price and very little vision for an Alberta in the grips of a perennially low cost of crude. Virtually every economist and most political commentaries have rightly pointed at the gaping hole in our revenues. Whether or not oil prices rise, we have to start paying our way. We have a structural deficit based on a history of using oil royalties for 20 to 35% of our budget. We must start paying more as a society if we want safe, healthy, generous, peaceful, stable communities where everyone have their basic needs met. It does appear to me that we in some ways are suggesting, and along with others, are suggesting a consideration of not only public sector cuts, provincial sales tax, evidence-based cuts to various aspects of government services and a new look at fees and other forms of revenue, including health care premiums. All of these need to be considered, but I would say that all of us, including the elected MLAs, have to look at how we can contribute to reducing our take in this province. We have to build a sense of solidarity, not an us versus them culture, and I would say a culture that has been aided and abetted by the official opposition in these debates. It's not us versus them, it's all of us together finding constructive ways to go forward, not alienate and divide. I find the situation particularly distressing as there are savings to be made in Alberta if we manage our expenses more readily. They're not easy, they require difficult choices and strong leadership, but they're there. First and foremost, Alberta Health Services. Clearly, a lot of money not being well spent. Primary care not serving people as well as it must. And cuts to the primary care networks have not served to develop the innovation and adaptations that are needed in primary care services. There's a lack of evaluation to provide check and balance in the health system to improve care. Testings and investigations are significantly overused. Medications are too often used, resulting in the wrong solution, complications, especially in the elderly, and the potential for problems of dependency and addictions that we're seeing more and more of. The lack of community care is overwhelming our emergency rooms and hospitals with people who are best cared for in the community. These are millions and millions of dollars of savings that are not and have not yet been addressed. Study after study, not least the recent report on the Mental Health and Addictions Committee, has suggested that the money needs to go into early intervention, into high-risk families and prevention programs that would prevent so much suffering and a lot of healthcare cost. The government, in changing from the status quo budgets of the Progressive Conservatives, had an opportunity to support team-based community care. And to be fair, there is some allocated for this, but nowhere near the emphasis that's needed. The budget states that the government is suddenly going to find $300 million in savings in 2018. This is what they call bending the cost curve. However, there's nothing in the line items to tell us exactly how. Glad to see capital spending on housing for the at-risk population after 4 years of no spending. Money designated for affordable housing, directed at repair and maintenance. These are essential if we're going to keep people safe and secure. I'm fully aware this budget has incredible limitations and there's little fiscal operating room. It would seem, though, that having made the hard choice to not drastically cut government spending, the government has then made no further hard decisions. It's time to look again at government services. The status quo is not going to help Albertans in the long run. We cannot run up debt with no plan to pay it off, and we cannot keep spending into entrenched systems like those of Alberta Health Services in the same manner. Thank you, Madam Speaker.